Hi, my name is Jason Johnston. I'm a VFX Director here at Beyond FX, and in this tutorial I'm going to explain how to create a ground impact decal for Unreal using Copernicus and a destruction sim in Houdini. One of the great things about Copernicus is the ability to read in geo from other parts of Houdini. So for this impact decal, we're going to first create a destruction sim using SOPs and DOPs before taking it into Copernicus. So let's dive in. I first put down a box with a size of 2 by 2 so that this box lives in a space between -1 to 1, which I find works best with Copernicus. I'm going to also add some divisions here so that we can then go into an attribute adjust color and paint in the center. We're painting in the center so that we can then drop down a scatter and scatter 50 points and use that color as the density attribute, which will allow us to get the points right in the center of the box. Taking that into an RBD material fracture, we're going to do a couple sets, like a couple levels of fracturing. And so if we look, the first level here, we're going to just do 100 points with a noise type of none to just to get general fracturing over the entire object. I'm going to then add a second level. And in this second level, I'm going to turn on input points so that we read in the scatter that is connected to the fourth input, and we get a higher concentration of fractures in the middle. So if we look at this, you can see the fractures are smaller and more in the middle than there are on the outsides. We've also added a bit of chipping here and some detail just to break up the edges so that they're not straight. Using an exploded view, you can viz the pieces. And you can see we have something like this. So we then take that material fracture and we go into an RBD configure. And what we're going to do here is we're going to first set everything to be deactive. And then in the second one here, we're going to activate, but we're going to use the bounds. And the bounds will then read from here. And then if we press enter over here, you can see that these are the pieces that are now active. And so setting certain pieces to be active equals 0 means that they'll be ignored by the simulation so that we don't have the edges moving. We'll then go into constraint properties, and we'll set up glue constraints for all of the pieces so that when they sim, they don't just fall apart. There is a glue holding them together unless there is force inflicted onto them. If the glue breaks, they'll then switch to soft constraints so that the pieces don't actually move too far away from one another. We want them to kind of stay near. So we're almost ready to go into the bullet solver, but first we're going to set up a collider, something that we can drop onto this object here, to the box, and break it. So I've set up a sphere, and I've set it to be active as well, and then I've given it some point velocity down on the Y so that it can just shoot down onto the box. If we look at the RBD solver, there's only a few things I had to switch here. So first thing is, if I turn on my visualization of the ground, you'll see that we have a ground plane that I've turned on in collision, and I've moved it down a little bit just to give some space here between the box and the ground. That gives us some space for these pieces when they get hit to move. We've also turned off any bounce, and we've added some substeps here. So if we go forward a few frames, you'll see that if I turn on the visualization of the collision, the ball has hit the box right in the middle, and that's created a nice fracture that we can use for the decal. I'm going to turn off the visualization of the ground, and then so now we're going to unpack it just to get our geo back, and we're going to freeze on frame 3 because we only need 1 frame for this, and 3 was what I ended up liking the most. So we have that. I'm then going to rotate it 90 degrees on the X just to get it ready for Copernicus. You can do this rotation inside of Copernicus, but I just chose to do it here. I'll then use a match size just to justify the Z on the min so that it moves a little bit in front This is going to be helpful for grabbing the depth. And that is basically the SOPs and DOPs workflow. Okay, now that we have the sim, we're going to put down a CopNet, and we're going to set the default resolution to 2K. And that will be the resolution of our texture. Going inside of the Copernicus network, we're going to first put down a SOP import. And in that SOP import, we're going to point it to the out node of the end of our chain of the destruction sim. That will pull in the geometry from the destruction sim like we had in the previous lesson. We'll then put down a rasterized setup, and the default settings work fine for this. And then from there, a rasterized geo. And with the rasterized geo, we can bring in the default of the P, the position, and we could also add an ID attribute of active if you want. I don't think we use it in this setup, but just to show you all those active attributes that I created back in SOPs, if you click on this this down here in the lower right, you can switch and see the different outputs. And you can see that we can actually pull that active attribute from the RBD sim. But for this, we'll switch it back to position. From there, we'll connect it over to a channel split. And if we pull the blue from the channel split, that's actually pulling the depth information that we set up in SOPs. To get it to the right range, I've done an equalize with a scale to maximum length. And now we have the depth in the correct format. We are creating a height texture with the depth information to take into Unreal. So looking at this texture, the white area will be flat, while the darker the values go towards black, the deeper they'll be. So that is our height of our sim. So what I like to do here is, if we go over here, I have another preview material. I'm just going to drag this over here. We're visualizing a texture here, but to really see what it looks like, we need to put it on a piece of geometry. So dropping down a preview material and setting the divisions to 1000. And I've also set the height scale and the normal map scale to 0.1. I could then take this and I could plug this directly into the height. And so if we visualize this, this is actually what we're seeing and the height values that we're getting out of our sim right now. So I like to use this instead of the texture view in most cases, just to get like a lay of the land. Okay, so from there, I realized that I wanted to lower it more because it's still kind of flat. And so rather than going back to the sim and trying to iterate over that, I decided to do it here in COPS. And so what I've done is I've taken an SDF shape of a circle and I've converted that SDF to a mono and then given it a slight blur. I then equalize it. And just so that it doesn't stay completely round when we lower the center, I've added a distort here. And going into the direction of the distort, I've put down a fractal noise with the slope direction and distorted that circle shape with that. So we get something like this. So then from there, if we put down a subtract, a blend node with it set to subtract, we're going to take the original height value and subtract this new value from it, which will then lower the center even more. And so if we look at that instead, if I visualize this, you can see if I just bypass this, how it's lowering it even more here. Okay, so then from there, I want to start adding finer details. So, because right now it's just kind of a plain looking fracture sim. So for the next step, what I've done is I've taken a damaged asphalt texture from Megascans that will be provided, and I've pulled that in. I've then extracted the red channel, and I've scaled it so that we get the scale of the features that we want. I'm then remapping it so that the darker areas are a bit darker, and then setting that to a mono, and then inverting it. So then now what we're going to do here is we're going to take and do another subtract. We're going to take our original value here that we had, and we're going to subtract even more. And now you may not see that much has happened, and this is why I like to use that preview material, because we're subtracting only a 0.02 from it, but you don't really see it. And so if we plug this into the height now, and we viz that, you can actually see there's a lot of detail being added. And so if I bypass this, we're adding all that texture detail into the sim. We also have this subtract being masked out by that center value that I'm pulling from the SDF. So I've taken that same SDF and I've remapped it so it's stronger. And then I'm using that as a mask so that we're only applying that subtract where that mask is. And so you'll see it only happens in this space. Okay, so then from there, I want to add another level. So it's like the destruction sim gave us the large pieces, and the texture gave us small features. And now we want something kind of in the middle. So for that, I took a procedural Voronoi texture that I've created here using a fractal noise with it set to whirly cellular, and I've remapped it so we get just those edges. And then using another fractal that is a higher frequency, I've created a slope dir, and then I'm distorting it. So basically we're distorting those edges. And then I'm going to raise the gamma. And then I'm going to, because if I was to apply this right now, this would be the same value across the board. But I want it to be stronger and weaker in areas. So I've taken a fractal noise that looks like this, and I'm just multiplying it so that it gets weaker in different areas. And then I'm doing the same thing. I'm subtracting from it with the value of 0.3. And so if we look at that, you can kind of see it appearing here in the middle. But if we again look at it using the height, and we just bypass this, you can kind of see all those medium-sized cracks being added right on top. Okay, so now we have our height where we want it. And so let's create a few maps based on this. So the first thing is, so that height directly goes right into the height. But then from there, we're going to put down this awesome node called height to normal and create a normal map from it. And that goes into normal. From there, we're going to take those values from the height map, and I'm going to then plug them into a height to ambient occlusion, which will give us something like this. And then remap it so that it gets a little bit darker on the crevices. And that's going to become our diffuse map. For visualization, I've remapped it to different values so that when it goes into the preview material here, we can just get different values like that rather than white to black. The last bit of info here is the roughness. So I've taken that texture that we had from the asphalt, and I've multiplied it by the mask, and then I've remapped it to the roughness values that I want, and then that goes into roughness. And so that is what we have here in Copernicus. Now the last bit is to export it. So for a game ready asset, you will want to pack them in, like channel pack them into red, green, and blue. But for this, I did not. But that would be a best practice going forward. So the way I set this up is I have a few different ROP image outputs. So I'm outputting the diffuse, the roughness, the normal, the height, and the mask. A quick little trick here is, say you're iterating on this and you don't want to press render 5 times for each iteration. What you can do is once you have that set up, you can drop down a ROP network, and then you can do a fetch and fetch all of those, and then just plug them into a merge and then press render here, and it'll go through and render them all out for every time you iterate on this. So that is the Copernicus setup, and now let's jump over to Unreal. Jumping over to Unreal, this is the decal setup that we have that I'm going to go over. So in the effects folder under Copernicus Decal in the textures, you'll see that we have the textures that I just exported with Houdini. We have the diffuse, we have the height, the mask, the normal, and the roughness. So what I've done is I've created a material and I've set it to deferred decal. With it set to deferred decal, we're going to set up the different passes for the base color, the roughness, and the normal. So let's first drop down a parallax occlusion mapping, and with that what we're going to do is create a texture object out of the height and then plug that into the height map texture. This height ratio is going to be basically how deep does this decal go. The min and max steps are set to 64, and the height map channel is set to 1 on the red. We're going to use a static bull to set the render shadows, and we're going to toggle it to be on because we are going to use the shadows that come out of the parallax occlusion mapping. We're going to then read in the sky atmosphere light direction as the light vector and set the shadow steps and the shadow penumbra. With the outputs, we now have UVs that we're going to plug into a lot of different maps here. But we're also going to take the shadow and from there create a named reroute node. For this setup, I've created one called shadow that we'll then grab later. Okay, so now that we have those UVs, we start setting up the base color. For the base color, I've pulled in the diffuse of the concrete floor that we've pulled from Megascans. I'm then multiplying it by the actual diffuse that we exported from Houdini. And then from there, I'm taking the height and I'm then lerping between a center darkness, basically a float value, and 1. And what that'll do is it'll give us a parameter on the material instance that if we want the center to be darker, we can. Right now I have it set to 1, so nothing's going to happen, but we will have that option. And then from there, we're going to multiply the base setup we had over here. Okay, then from there, we're going to lerp between the output of these values and basically a mult of 0.2 against it. And we're going to lerp between those based on the shadow. And so what that is that whenever the decal is in shadow based on the light direction, it is going to lerp between this setup and a darker version of it, but only in the shadowed areas. We then plug that into a named reroute called base color, and that goes into base color here. If we were to look at this, you can see that is our color. It doesn't show completely accurate in this viewport, but in the scene it will. Okay, so that's the base color. So let's go into roughness. Again, the parallax UVs are going into all these channels, and that's basically going to give us a different look of the map based on the way that we're viewing it from the camera. So I'm pulling in this ground roughness map from the same concrete floor. And just to mention, the concrete floor that we have is from Megascans, and we're basically modifying it with our decal maps that we have exported from Houdini. So I take that ground roughness, and it's very similar to the color. We take our Copernicus roughness. I'm plugging it into a remap value range so that I can fine-tune the roughness min and max that I want in this scene. I'm then multiplying that concrete roughness with our decal roughness, and then I am lerping between the base roughness and our decal roughness based on a mask, and the mask is the mask that we exported from Houdini, and that goes into roughness. And what that gives us is, it's kind of hard to see. Yeah, it's not really showing all the values correct, so but it will when it's plugged in. Okay, so from there, we're going to set up the normal. So we have the ground normal from the concrete floor. I've added this flattened normal with a scalar value attached to it so that we can basically control the intensity of the normal on the ground independently from the decal. And so what you'll see is the ground normal has a flattened normal, and then also our decal normal has a flattened normal, both with scalar values that we can control separately. We're then reading in a base flatten normal map, which is basically just a complete flat normal, and we're lerping between that and our decal normal based on this mask, so that it goes completely flat here on the outsides. And then we're doing a blend angle corrected normals to blend the concrete normals and our decal normals together. and that goes into normal. And then all three of those named reroutes go into base color, roughness, and normal. And that will create this. Now, going a step further, from there you can right click and you can do create material instance, and you will get this. And this is actually what I'm applying to the decal. And creating material instance basically gives you a parameter interface with controls for all of the scalar values, vector values, everything that we set up in the base material. And so you see that center darkness that I was showing off right here, I am actually melting it down by 0.75. So if I put this to 1, you'll see that it's a little bit lighter in here. And if I put it to 0, it gets completely dark. And so that's what that does. It allows us to add some darkness if we want it. Setting this back to 0.75. The roughness min and max, that's what I found worked best for this. The height ratio is a value of 0.055. But if I wanted to, I can make that like a 0.1, and you can see it actually gets deeper there. All right, and that is the material setup. So say you wanted this to actually animate. I'm going to show you how you could set up something like that. So what I've done is I've duplicated that material and I've created an animated version. That way we don't stomp on everything that we've created already. So I've also created a material instance of it, so I'm going to apply that to our decal. So if we open up the material instance that I just applied, bring it off to the side here, you'll see I have a parameter called anim. Now if I set this to 0, you'll see that we just have the ground as if nothing has happened to it. And so as I take this towards 1, you can see that it gets deeper and darker. So let me show you how I've set that up. So a lot of it is the same way that the base material is set up. There's just a few changes on each of the different sections. So the first section with a change is the parallax occlusion mapping. So before we had the height ratio going directly into height ratio. Now I'm multiplying it based on that scalar parameter called anim. So with a default set to 1. So then from there, coming out, if we go up to the base color, so basically when height is 0, we want it to have no darkening from the decal map. And so what I've done here is I've added a lerp at the end, and when it is 0, it is going to go into the base concrete map, and when it is 1, it is going to go into the setup we created before. Same situation here in the roughness. Basically what we want is that when it is a value, if anim is a value of 0, we are reading in the base ground roughness, and when it is a value of 1, we're reading in the new roughness that has been multiplied by the decal. And so what we've done is I've added a lerp here so that when, and we're visualizing it here, if anim is set to 0, you'll see that it is black. And if anim is set to 1, it is the mask value. And I've plugged that into the alpha of this lerp here. And so it's a little bit hard to see, but if I set this to 0, you'll see that there's nothing there, and 1, it basically is showing the output of this. Okay, so let's go down to the normal. The normal is very straightforward. With anim set to 0, it's reading in just the ground normal, and with it set to 1, it's reading in our blend angle corrected normals with our decal normals here. And so that is the animation setup. And so like if we go back here, and we now have this anim scalar that we can then animate. And so you could tie this to a Niagara hit, like so that when the Niagara system goes off and it spawns this decal, you have a quick like motion of it, so it's not just appearing. That'd be one way to use this. Okay, so that's the setup. I hope you enjoyed and it helps in some way. Thanks for watching.